CEO Kim Min-jun, a man whose fortune was as vast as his solitude, dragged himself home. The weight of the day, and of a life devoid of warmth, bowed his shoulders. He anticipated the cold silence of his mansion, the emptiness in the eyes of his two young daughters, Kim Ha-eun and Kim Seo-yeon, who were still recovering from a profound loss. But that night, something was different. A soft sound of children's laughter echoed through the halls, something he hadn't heard in years. Min-jun's heart tightened with a mix of apprehension and a strange hope. He couldn't believe what the new nanny, Lee Ji-yoon, had done to his daughters. The sound, initially a distant whisper, grew in intensity as Min-jun advanced down the main corridor. It wasn't the sharp, forced sound of simulated play that he occasionally heard when previous nannies tried, unsuccessfully, to coax a smile from his daughters. It was something purer, more spontaneous. Laughter, genuine. Laughter he hadn't heard echo through those walls in how long? Years. Since before his wife's departure, when the light of joy faded from their childlike eyes and from his own soul. Each step towards the living room was a clash between hope and the deepest apprehension. Hope was a fragile flower he had long given up cultivating, and the fear of seeing it wither again was almost unbearable. What could Lee Ji-eun, the new nanny, have done in just one day to provoke such a miracle? Or was it an illusion, a farce orchestrated to impress him? Min-jun's mind, accustomed to the calculating coldness of the corporate world, sought a logical explanation for the inexplicable. He stopped at the threshold of the door, hidden by the shadow of the jamb, and peeked in. The scene unfolding before his eyes was so surreal he had to blink, convincing himself he wasn't dreaming. Lee Ji-yoon wasn't sitting rigidly on the sofa, eyes fixed on a tablet while the children played alone. She was on the floor, on the Persian rug he had imported from Turkey, now covered with colorful paper scraps, markers, and small felt puppets. Ji-eun was on her knees, head bowed, concentrating on something she held in her hands. Ha-eun, his eldest daughter, 7 years old, was beside her, eyes wide with fascination, a wide, uninhibited smile illuminating her face. Seo-yeon, the youngest at 5, was nestled in Ji-eun's lap, her head resting on the nanny's shoulder, watching with an intensity Min-jun hadn't seen since she was a baby. And then Ji-eun held up what she was creating, a small paper puppet with butterfly wings. She made the puppet fly in the air with a soft sound, and the two girls burst into laughter. It wasn't restrained laughter, but open, pure giggles that came from the depths of their little bellies. Ha-eun clapped her hands, and Seo-yeon stretched out her arms to try and catch the flying puppet, letting out a squeal of delight. Min-jun felt a lump in his throat. This was no farce. The joy on their faces was palpable, real. Their eyes, once dull and filled with a sadness that seemed too great for their small bodies, now shone with a vivacity he thought he had lost forever. Ji-eun, with a warm and genuine smile, handed the puppet to Seo-yeon, who hugged it as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. "Look, Daddy!" Ha-eun suddenly exclaimed, turning towards the door. She had seen him. The smile didn't waver, but her eyes for a brief instant seemed uncertain, as if she feared her joy might be reprimanded. Min-jun felt a pang of pain. Was he the figure who brought silence back? Ji-eun, noticing his presence, rose with natural grace, wiping her hands on her jeans. Her smile remained, but now there was a hint of respect and perhaps a little surprise in her eyes. "Mr. Kim," she said, her voice soft and calm, without the subservient tone he was accustomed to hearing from his employees. "The girls were helping me make a small paper butterfly garden. They are very creative." Creative? Min-jun almost laughed. His daughters barely spoke, and now they were very creative. He looked at the rug, at the colorful papers, at the small butterfly puppets Ji-eun and the girls had made. Each was simple but full of a childlike charm, of a life he couldn't recognize. Daddy, Ji-Yununi taught me how to make a flower that opens, Seo-Yeon said, holding out a folded paper flower that, when placed in a glass of water, slowly began to unfurl. Seo-Yeon's eyes shone with pride, and she looked at him, awaiting a reaction. Min-jun was paralyzed. He had tried everything: expensive toys, private lessons, luxurious trips. Nothing had managed to penetrate the barrier of sadness that enveloped his daughters. And now, a paper flower and some butterflies had done what his fortune and efforts could not. Lee Ji-eun, with her simplicity and warmth, had achieved what he considered impossible. His mind was in a whirl. Who was this woman? How dared she bring so much light into a home he had accepted as eternally gloomy? A part of him felt overwhelming gratitude, a wave of relief that threatened to break down his carefully constructed defenses. But another part, the cynical and wounded part, felt a pang of jealousy, of distrust. It was too good to be true. What did she want? What was behind this facade of kindness? He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He couldn't believe what she had done to his daughters. The tension in his chest was not just surprise, but a newfound fear. The fear that this new and fragile happiness could be taken from them as quickly as it had arrived. He looked at Ji-eun, who watched him with a calm, curious expression, and felt a shiver run down his spine. The nanny had done more than just care for his children. She had shaken the foundations of his world, and he didn't know if he was ready for it. Time stopped for Kim Min-jun. The paper flower, slowly unfolding in the water, seemed a silent miracle, a direct challenge to everything he believed to be true. Seo-Yeon's eyes, shining with a childlike pride he never thought he'd see again, fixed on him, waiting. What to say? How to react to such pure, unexpected happiness, which seemed to have been conjured from nowhere by a stranger? His mind, accustomed to calculating risks and returns, found no equation for it. Gratitude, a long-forgotten emotion, fought against the distrust that was his second nature. He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. It was as if he were witnessing a scene from a movie, distant and unreal, and any attempt at interaction could break the fragile spell. Ha-eun, the elder, noticing her father's silence, squeezed Ji-eun's hand lightly. A subtle gesture, almost imperceptible, but one that did not escape Min-jun's eyes. It was a sign of protection, of attachment. His daughters, who once recoiled at the slightest shadow, now sought refuge and comfort in a woman they had known for less than a day. The pang of jealousy, once a mere annoyance, turned into a sharp pain. Ji-eun, with her unwavering calm, intervened gently. Seo-Yeon, show Daddy how the flower opens completely. It's magic, isn't it? Her voice was a balm, breaking the heavy silence without being intrusive. She didn't press him, didn't force him to react, but gently directed attention to the children's joy. Min-jun finally managed to force a smile that didn't reach his eyes, but it was the best he could offer at that moment. It's very beautiful, Seo-Yeon, he managed to say, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. Did you make it? Seo-Yeon nodded vigorously, her hair swaying. Ji-eun taught me, and she said I'm very good. She looked at Ji-eun, seeking confirmation, and the nanny smiled back, a smile of approval that made the little girl's heart swell with happiness. Min-jun observed the interaction. The nanny wasn't just teaching a technique, she was nurturing his daughter's self-esteem, something he, with all his fortune, couldn't buy. He felt like an intruder in his own home, a silent spectator in the new life his daughters seemed to be building with this woman. Mr. Kim, the girls haven't had dinner yet, Ji-eun said, her voice returning to a respectful tone, but still without the subservience he expected. I prepared something light as Ms. Choi instructed. Shall we go to the kitchen? It was an escape, an opportunity to step away from that scene that disturbed him as much as it enchanted him. Min-jun nodded, unable to formulate a more complex sentence. Yes, please. As Ji-eun helped the girls collect the colorful papers with quiet efficiency, Min-jun retreated into the shadow of the hallway. He watched them. Ha-eun, who previously refused to touch anything but her books, now carefully put away the felt puppets, a small smile still on her lips. Seo-yeon, hugging the paper butterfly puppet, seemed to have found a new friend. The nanny, Lee Ji-eun, was not like the others. The previous nannies were impeccable in their qualifications, their references unblemished, but none of them had managed to break the barrier of pain that enveloped his daughters. They followed protocols, ensured safety and nutrition, but human warmth, genuine connection, was absent. Ji-eun, however, seemed to possess a key to his daughters' hearts, a key he, their own father, had lost long ago. The question hammered in his mind. Why? What motivated her? No one did something like this without a hidden motive. Genuine kindness was a rarity in his world, almost a weakness. He had built his empire on distrust, on reading hidden intentions and anticipating betrayals. And now, this woman, with her simplicity and warm smile, was dismantling his defenses, one paper butterfly at a time. He watched her guide the girls to the kitchen, their small hands holding hers. The sound of their voices, once a whisper of laughter, was now a soft melody of childlike conversations. Min-jun felt an emptiness in his stomach, a hunger not for food, but for something he couldn't identify. He went to his office, the sanctuary of his solitude. He sat at his ebony desk, his gaze fixed on the dark computer screen. But his mind was not on financial reports or upcoming acquisitions. It was in the living room, on the rug covered with colorful papers, in the laughter that still echoed in his ears. He picked up the phone, hesitating. Who to call? His assistant, Mr. Park, was loyal, but wouldn't understand. His colleagues would see this as a distraction, a weakness. He was alone with this disturbing discovery. The image of Ji-eun, kneeling on the floor, his daughters nestled around her, was etched in his memory. She wasn't just caring for his children, she was healing them. And somehow, she was exposing the depth of his own inability to do the same. Min-jun felt the chill again, but this time, it wasn't just distrust. It was a deeper fear. A fear that, by opening the doors to this new happiness, he was opening the doors to even greater pain. What if Ji-eun left? What if this light, so bright and unexpected, went out again? The situation reached its definitive conclusion. The elements of danger were contained, and the characters involved found a path to safety and tranquility. Order was re-established, allowing a new period of calm and stability to begin. The office door closed with a soft click, but the sound echoed in Kim Min-jun's mind like thunder. He collapsed into the leather chair, the darkness of the room engulfing him, but not the confusion swirling in his head. The computer screen remained dark, a mirror to the emptiness he felt, but which was now filled with disturbing images. Seo-yeon extending the paper flower, Ha-eun putting away the felt puppets, and Ji-eun with that calm smile at the center of it all. He had built an empire on logic, on the cold analysis of data and the anticipation of every move of his adversaries. But what was happening in his own home defied all his understanding. His daughter's joy, the light he thought had been extinguished forever, had been rekindled by a woman he had known for less than 24 hours. And that was the part that terrified him. Gratitude, yes. It was there, a warm, overwhelming wave that threatened to break down the walls of cynicism he had erected. But along with it came distrust, a slow poison that seeped into every thought. It was too good to be true. This phrase, a mantra in his corporate world, now resonated with frightening force in his personal life. No one did so much, gave so much, without a motive. In his universe, kindness was a bargaining chip, an investment with an expected return. What did Ji-eun expect to gain? He picked up the phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. It wasn't to call a friend, for he had none who could understand the complexity of his situation. It wasn't for a counselor, for his pain was too personal to be dissected by a stranger. It was for Mr. Park, his loyal and efficient assistant, the man who solved his problems before he even formulated them. "Mr. Park," he said, his voice firmer than he felt, "I need a full report on Lee Ji-eun. Everything. Family history, academic, financial, social, every detail. And I want it done with the utmost discretion. No one, absolutely no one, must know." "Understood." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Park, always impeccable, never questioned, but Min Jun could sense the veiled surprise in his silence. "Understood, Mr. Kim. When do you need it by?" "Yesterday," Min Jun replied, impatience gnawing at him. "Top priority. And Mr. Park, if there's anything at all that seems out of place, I want to know immediately." He hung up, the phone heavy in his hand. The decision was made. He couldn't simply accept this happiness as a gift. He needed to understand the gears behind it. It was for safety, he convinced himself, for his daughter's safety. But deep down, he knew it was also for his own sanity, for the need to fit the inexplicable into a logic he could understand and control. Minjun stood up and walked to the window, watching the darkness outside. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the oppressive silence from before. There was an echo of life, a residue of children's laughter that seemed to float through the walls. He approached the office door, opening it just a crack. The smell of home cooking, something he rarely smelled, came from the kitchen. He could hear low voices, Ji-eun's soft voice and his daughter's voices, now clearer, more animated. He crept down the hallway, stopping near the kitchen entrance, hidden by the shadow. From there, he could see. Ji-eun was sitting at the table with Ha-eun and Seo-yeon. They weren't eating in silence, each in their own world, as was customary. They were talking. Ji-eun was telling a story, her voice melodious and engaging, and the girls listened, eyes wide. Seo-yeon laughed, a clear, crystalline laugh that made Minjun's heart clench. Ha-eun, the always serious Ha-eun, had a small smile on her lips and even gestured slightly as Ji-eun spoke. It was such a common, trivial scene, and yet for Minjun it was a miracle he couldn't trust. He watched the way Ji-eun looked at them, with a genuine tenderness that seemed to overflow. There was no falsity in her eyes, no calculation in her gestures. She seemed to simply like them, to like his daughters in a way that he, in his pain and detachment, had forgotten how to do. The sight should have brought relief, peace, but it only increased his anguish. If she was so good, so pure, so capable of reaching his daughters, what did that say about him? And what if she left? What would happen to this fragile happiness she had conjured? The fear that this light would go out again was almost unbearable. He retreated, returning to the darkness of his office, his heart pounding in his chest. Mr. Park would do his job. He would find out the truth about Lee Ji-eun, and then Minjun would have the answers. He would have control back. But as he waited, the tension in his chest did not diminish. It transformed into a silent, relentless vigilance. He needed to understand Lee Ji-eun. He needed to find out what she really wanted. And he was determined to do so before she could break what remained of his carefully constructed world, or worse still, before she could leave, taking with her the new and fragile hope she had ignited in his home. The night would be long, and the weight unbearable. He crept down the hallway, stopping near the kitchen entrance, hidden by the shadow. From there, he could see. Ji-eun was sitting at the table with Ha-eun and Seo-yeon. They weren't eating in silence, each in their own world, as was customary. They were talking. Ji-eun was telling a story, her voice melodious and engaging, and the girls listened, eyes wide. Seo-yeon laughed, a clear, crystalline laugh that made Minjun's heart clench. Ha-eun, the always serious Ha-eun, had a small smile on her lips and even gestured slightly as Ji-eun spoke. It was such a common, trivial scene, and yet, for Min-jun, it was a miracle he couldn't trust. He watched the way Ji-eun looked at them with a genuine tenderness that seemed to overflow. There was no falsity in her eyes, no calculation in her gestures. She seemed to simply like them, to like his daughters in a way that he, in his pain and detachment, had forgotten how to do. The sight should have brought relief, peace, but it only increased his anguish. If she was so good, so pure, so capable of reaching his daughters, what did that say about him? And what if she left? What would happen to this fragile happiness she had conjured? The fear that this light would go out again was almost unbearable. Still hidden in the shadows, Min-jun watched the kitchen for a few more minutes. The melody of the children's voices and the nanny's gentleness were both a balm and a poison. He found himself imagining what it would be like to have this peace in his home every day, a peace he hadn't felt since his wife's death. But the image of his wife, so vivid in his memory, brought with it the pain of loss and the reminder of how fleeting happiness can be. He couldn't allow himself to be vulnerable again. He couldn't allow his daughters to be. He returned to his desk, but didn't turn on the computer. Instead, he opened a secret drawer and took out a small wooden box. Inside were some old photos. One showed his wife with a radiant smile, holding a tiny Ha-eun. The other, he and his wife, young and full of hope. He traced the outline of her face with his thumb, the familiar pain tightening his chest. It was this pain that transformed him, that made him build walls so high that even he couldn't climb them. Ji-eun, with her simplicity and warmth, was finding cracks in those walls, and that scared him more than any business adversary. He didn't know how to deal with disinterested kindness, with joy that didn't come with a visible price. In his world, everything had a price. He put the photos away, the box back in its place, and closed the drawer with a dry click. The decision to investigate Ji-eun was not just about distrust, but about self-protection. He needed answers to protect what remained of his family and to protect himself from the possibility of a new and devastating loss. The truth, whatever it was, would be better than this uncertainty that gnawed at him from within. He would wait. And while he waited, he would observe every move, every word, every smile of Lee Ji-eun, the woman who had turned his world upside down. The darkness of the office was no longer a refuge, but an echo chamber for Min-jun's confusion. The daughters' voices, Ji-eun's soft melody, everything seemed to reverberate through the walls, invading his space, his mind. He tried to focus on the financial reports on his screen, but the numbers danced, the words blurred. His mind was stuck in a loop, reliving the scene in the kitchen. Seo-yeon's laughter, Ha-eun's smile, the tenderness in Ji-eun's eyes. It was such a perfect picture it seemed unreal. And the unreal, in his world, was synonymous with dangerous. He turned off the computer, the dark screen reflecting his tense face. The house was quiet now, the voices silenced, but Ji-eun's presence, the new atmosphere she had brought, was palpable. It was as if a gentle breeze had entered a dusty house, stirring up the dust and revealing the light. But Min-jun didn't know if this light was a beacon or a will-o'-the-wisp. The night advanced, slow and torturous. Min-jun couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind seemed amplified, laden with meaning. He got up and walked to the girl's bedroom door. The sliver of light under the door indicated that Ji-eun was still there. He could hear a soft melody, a lullaby he hadn't heard in years. It was an old Korean lullaby, one his own mother used to sing. A pang of nostalgia and a wave of distrust hit him simultaneously. How did she know? Was it a coincidence, or another piece in a puzzle he couldn't put together? He backed away, feeling like an intruder in his own home. The sight of Ji-un caring for his daughters with such natural dedication was both comforting and terrifying. He wanted to believe. He desperately wanted that kindness to be real, that happiness to be lasting. But the voice of reason, forged in years of loss and betrayal, screamed that it was a trap. Dawn brought with it a new layer of anxiety. Min-jun went down to the kitchen earlier than usual, hoping to catch her off guard. But Ji-un was already there, preparing breakfast. The aroma of pancakes and fresh coffee filled the air, a smell he didn't associate with his home. She was dressed simply, but impeccably, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun. There were no signs of fatigue, just a serene calm as she moved about the kitchen. "Good morning, Mr. Kim," she said, turning with a small smile. "Coffee is ready. The girls are still sleeping, but they'll be up soon." Min-jun merely nodded, unable to formulate a response. He sat at the table, watching her. She seemed so ordinary, so normal. And that's what disturbed him. In his world, nothing was that simple. As she served the coffee, he noticed a small silver brooch pinned to her apron. It was a delicate brooch in the shape of a lotus flower. Nothing special, but something about its simplicity intrigued him. Was it a gift, an heirloom? He forced himself to look away, feeling like a spy. The girls came down soon after, their eyes still sleepy, but they quickly brightened upon seeing Ji-un. Seo-yeon ran to hug her, and Ji-un received her with a warmth that made Min-jun's heart clench. Ha-un, though more restrained, had a sparkle in her eyes he hadn't seen in a long time. Breakfast was a cacophony of voices and laughter, something Min-jun had forgotten existed. Ji-un talked to the girls about their dreams, about plans for the day. She listened to them with genuine attention, asking questions, encouraging them to express themselves. Min-jun, on the other hand, felt like a stranger at his own table, a silent observer of a scene he couldn't comprehend. He found himself analyzing every move Ji-un made. The way she cut the pancakes for Seo-yeon, the way she offered a napkin to Ha-un before she even asked. Small gestures, but they revealed an attention and care that he, in his pain, had neglected. "Mr. Kim, is everything all right?" Ji-un asked, her voice soft, pulling him from his thoughts. "You seem a little, distant." He looked up, meeting her eyes. They were clear eyes, without a trace of malice or ulterior motives. For a brief moment, he felt a pang of shame for his distrust, but the armor he had built was too strong to yield so easily. "I'm fine, Ji-un-si," he replied, his voice cold and controlled. "Just thinking about work." She nodded without pressing, but Min-jun could sense that she had noticed something. The tension between them was almost palpable, a stark contrast to her light-hearted interaction with the girls. After breakfast, he locked himself in his office. The phone was on his desk, a constant reminder of the ongoing investigation. He waited for Mr. Park, for a message, for anything that could make sense of this woman. With each passing hour, Min-jun's anxiety grew. He found himself peeking out the window, listening to the sounds of the house. He heard the girls playing in the garden, their laughter echoing. Ji-un was with them, her voice calm and encouraging, punctuating their play. She was building something with them, perhaps a makeshift treehouse or a sandcastle. The image of his daughters smiling, free and happy, was a balm to his wounded soul. But it was also a poison, for it fed his fear. What if Mr. Park's report revealed something terrible? What if Ji-un wasn't who she seemed to be? And what if she left, taking with her the new light she had ignited in his home? The thought was unbearable. He picked up the phone again, his fingers hovering over Mr. Park's number. He wanted to call, to rush things, but knew that discretion was paramount. He needed answers, but he needed the right answers. Min-jun closed his eyes, trying to calm the storm in his chest. He had built his life on the premise that pain was inevitable, and the only way to survive was to protect himself, to control. But Ji-un, with her inexplicable kindness, was dismantling that premise piece by piece. And he didn't know if he was being saved or destroyed. The wait was excruciating. Every minute was an eternity, laden with the promise of a truth that could free him or shatter him completely. The afternoon dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity for Min-jun. The girls' laughter in the garden, Ji-un's soft voice, everything was a constant reminder of the duality that consumed him. He saw the joy of his daughters, the sparkle in their eyes that had been dimmed for so long. And at the same time, he saw the woman who, in his pain-distorted mind, was an unknown, a potential threat. He struggled to work, to focus on the numbers and strategies that once filled his life, but it was useless. The image of Ji-un, with the lotus brooch on her apron, the lullaby his mother sang, the small gestures of care she dedicated to his daughters, everything mingled in a whirlwind of unanswered questions. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, but the darkness that settled in Min-jun's mind was much deeper. He sat at his desk, the phone a silent object of torture. Any moment Mr. Park would call. The truth, he thought, would be like a scalpel, cutting through the uncertainty and revealing the wound, but he didn't know if the wound would be Ji-un's or his own. A dry, vibrating ring echoed through the office. Min-jun's heart leapt. It was the phone. The name Mr. Park flashed on the screen. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the tremor in his hands, and answered. "Mr. Kim." Mr. Park's voice was professional, emotionless. "I have the information you requested about Lee Ji-un." Min-jun said nothing, just waited, every fiber of his being on high alert. "Ms. Lee Ji-un has an impeccable record," Mr. Park began, and Min-jun felt a knot form in his stomach. Impeccable? That was what he feared most. No criminal record, no significant debt. Previous employment references are all excellent. She worked for 3 families in the last 5 years, all with young children. All references describe her as extremely dedicated, reliable, and caring. One of the families, the Parks, even said she saved their sanity after a difficult period. Min-jun frowned. Saved their sanity? The description was almost identical to how he felt, and that disturbed him even more. Was it a facade, a rehearsed performance? "Is there anything else, Mr. Park?" he asked, his voice tense. "Yes. There's a small period, approximately 6 months, between her last job and the current one, where she has no formal work record. She claimed to have taken time off to care for a sick family member in the countryside. We found nothing to contradict this claim, but there are also no formal records to prove it." 6 months, a sick family member. Min-jun felt a chill. It was a common excuse, easy to invent, difficult to verify. In his world, gaps were synonymous with secrets. "And what else?" Min-jun insisted. "We did a more thorough background check, Mr. Kim. We contacted the university where she studied, former neighbors. Everything seems to be in order. She is described as a reserved person, but always kind and helpful. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, to suggest any kind of ill intent or suspicious behavior." Silence hung in the air. Min-jun felt a strange mix of relief and frustration. Relief because there was no obvious red flag, but frustration because the lack of anything wrong was, for him, the biggest red flag of all. In his experience, perfection was always an illusion, a mask. "Are you sure, Mr. Park? Is there nothing, not even a tiny detail, that seems out of place?" "Mr. Kim, I understand your concern, but my report is conclusive. Lee Ji-un is exactly who she says she is, a highly qualified nanny with a clean record. The only anomaly is that 6-month period, but as I said, there is nothing to indicate anything illicit." Minjun thanked Mr. Park and hung up the phone. He leaned back in his chair, his head spinning. Impeccable, clean, caring. Mr. Park's words echoed in his ears, but in his mind they transformed into whispers of distrust. It was too perfect. The 6-month gap, the story of the sick family member. For Minjun, that wasn't an explanation, but a clue to something she was hiding. He stood up and went to the window, watching the darkness swallow the garden. The kitchen lights were on. He could see Ji-eun's silhouette through the curtain, moving with the same serene calm as always. The girls must already be asleep. The truth, he realized, had not been a scalpel, but an even denser fog. Mr. Park's report, instead of dispelling his doubts, had solidified them, transforming them into a dark certainty. Ji-eun was hiding something, and he was more determined than ever to find out what. Her perfection was an armor, and he needed to find the crack. The night would be even longer than the previous one. Minjun could no longer afford to merely observe. He needed to act, but with caution. He needed more than a report. He needed a confession or irrefutable proof. And he knew with cold certainty that the answer was not in documents, but in Lee Ji-eun's eyes. He would watch her, not as an employer, but as a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. The hunt had just begun. He couldn't lose his daughters again, couldn't be deceived again. His wife's pain was still an open wound, and he wouldn't allow Ji-eun with her suspicious kindness to reopen it. He would unmask her, whatever the cost. Perfection. The word echoed in Minjun's mind like a dissonant note in a perfect melody. Mr. Park's report, instead of calming his tormented soul, had ignited a new kind of fire within him. Impeccable, clean, caring. For Minjun, these words were not guarantees of innocence, but rather the pillars of a meticulously constructed facade. The 6-month gap, the story of the sick family member in the countryside. Now, more than ever, he was convinced that therein lay the key to unraveling the mystery of Lee Ji-eun. The hunt had not just begun. It had transformed into a cold, calculating obsession. The next morning, the house seemed bathed in a different light, but the darkness within Minjun persisted. He went down for breakfast, his senses on high alert. Ji-eun was in the kitchen, preparing the meal with the same calm and efficiency as always. The girls, Seo-yeon and Ha-eun, were already at the table, their eyes shining with anticipation. The scene was idyllic, almost unreal, and this only fueled Minjun's distrust. He sat, observing every move Ji-eun made, the way she poured the juice, the delicacy with which she arranged the cutlery. She smiled at the girls, answering their questions with a patience Minjun had forgotten existed. He looked for any slip, any micro-expression that might betray the truth behind her clear eyes. But there was nothing. The mask was perfect. As Ji-eun leaned over to help Seo-yeon cut a piece of fruit, the sleeve of her apron moved slightly, revealing for an instant the inside of her left wrist. Minjun noticed. A small, almost imperceptible, but old mark. A scar. It wasn't a cut, but it looked more like a burn, faded by time, but still visible. It was subtle, but to Minjun's trained eyes which sought flaws. It was like a beacon in the fog. Before he could analyze further, the sleeve covered the mark again. He blinked, wondering if he had imagined it, but the image was etched in his mind. The day unfolded with Ji-eun maintaining her impeccable routine. She took the girls to the park, helped with homework, prepared a delicious lunch. Minjun, in his office, tried to concentrate, but his mind repeatedly returned to that small mark on her wrist. A burn. What did it mean? Was it just a common household accident, or was there something more behind it? That evening during dinner, the television in the living room was on a news channel, as always. Minjun usually ignored the background hum, but that night every sound was amplified. A reporter spoke about a forest fire that had occurred a few months ago in a remote rural area in the interior of the country. The images showed charred houses, rescue teams, and faces of displaced residents. Min-jun, who was finishing his dinner, glanced at Ji-eun. She was sitting at the table with the girls, helping Ha-eun pick up a piece of kimchi. The moment the news report about the fire aired, Min-jun saw it. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but he saw it. Ji-eun's body stiffened for a fraction of a second. Her gaze, which had been focused on Ha-eun, shifted to the television, and for a fleeting instant a shadow of pain and perhaps even fear crossed her eyes. She took a deep breath, almost a sigh, and then, with remarkable willpower, composed herself, smiling back at Ha-eun as if nothing had happened. But Min-jun had seen it, the reaction, the mark on her wrist, the 6-month gap, the sick family member in the countryside. Everything fit into a much darker narrative than a simple period of leave. It wasn't just a sick family member, it was something traumatic, something that had marked her, literally. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Ji-eun's perfection was not a mask, it was an armor, and he had just found a small but significant crack. The truth was not in Mr. Park's documents, but in the subtext, in the unspoken gestures, in the secrets she guarded so jealously. Min-jun finished dinner in silence, his mind racing. He couldn't confront her directly. She was intelligent, and if she sensed she was being investigated, she might flee, taking with her the new joy she had brought to his daughters. He needed more proof, a deeper understanding of what she was hiding. The hunt had changed phase. It was no longer about checking a background, but about unraveling a past. He needed to find out what had happened in those 6 months, what had caused that mark on her wrist, and why the fire story affected her so much. Min-jun knew that the answer would not come from a detective, but from his own meticulous observation. He would unmask her, not to destroy her, but to protect his daughters from any shadow she might bring. The night would be long, and the search for the truth was just beginning. The night stretched on, cold and silent, but within me a storm raged. The mark on the wrist, the sick family member, the 6-month gap, and now the reaction to the news about the fire. The pieces fit together, not into a puzzle of innocence, but into a dark mosaic of secrets. Ji-eun was not just a perfect nanny. She was a woman with a painful past, a past she hid with frightening mastery. And my intuition, the same one that failed me so tragically in the past, screamed that this secret, however personal, could have dangerous ramifications for my daughters. I leaned back in the office chair, dinner untouched. The image of that wrist, that faded mark, wouldn't leave my mind. A burn. It didn't seem like a trivial accident, and the way she had stiffened, the shadow in her eyes when she saw the images of the fire. It was unmistakable, a connection. I needed to know. I needed to unravel what had happened in those 6 months, what had led her from a normal life to the brink of a devastating fire in the countryside, and then to my home, with a perfect smile and an impeccable record. The hunt had truly begun, and now I had a direction. I could no longer rely on superficial reports. I needed facts, irrefutable proof. But above all, I needed caution. Ji-eun was intelligent. If she realized she was being investigated, she could disappear as quickly as she appeared, taking with her the peace that, ironically, she had brought to my daughters. And I couldn't allow that. Not yet. The next morning, I acted with calculated coldness. While Ji-eun prepared breakfast, I called Mr. Park again with a pretext. Mr. Park, I would like a more in-depth analysis of that 6-month period. I want to know the name of the town, the exact region where she claimed to have cared for the sick family member, and if possible, any record of significant events in that area during that time. Fires, floods, anything that might have affected people's lives. My voice was neutral, professional. Mr. Park, without questioning, promised to investigate. He didn't know I already had a clue. While waiting for Mr. Park's return, I began my own discreet investigation. I used my computer, searching for forest fires in the interior of the country, focusing on the period Ji-un was absent. There were several, but one in particular caught my attention. A large fire in a remote village in Gangwon province about 7 months ago. The report mentioned the destruction of several homes and the evacuation of residents. The image of a woman with a soot-covered face being supported by rescuers made me pause. It wasn't Ji-un, but the scene was desolate. I continued to observe Ji-un. During the day, she was the picture of perfection. She played with the girls, read stories, prepared nutritious meals. But I saw her with different eyes now. Every smile, every affectionate gesture was analyzed under the lens of my distrust. I looked for any sign of stress, of melancholy, of something that would break the facade. And sometimes, for a split second, I saw it. A distant look as she gazed out the window, an almost inaudible sigh when she thought no one was paying attention. Small fragments that confirmed the existence of a hidden pain. One afternoon, while the girls were sleeping and Ji-un was in the laundry room, I approached her belongings. It wasn't something I would normally do, but the urgency of protecting my daughters outweighed any scruples. I looked for something that could give me more information about her past. Inside her purse, I found a simple wallet. Besides her identification documents, there was a photo, an old, slightly faded photo. In it, Ji-un was smiling, embracing an older woman who appeared to be her mother, and a young man, perhaps a brother. They were in front of a modest house with a simple garden. The house looked familiar somehow. I stored the image in my mind. Later that day, Mr. Park called me back. "Mr. Kim, I got some information about the region Ms. Lee indicated. It's a rural area in Gangwon province. And indeed, there was a large forest fire there about 7 months ago. It was quite devastating, with some villages completely destroyed. Ms. Lee had no direct family members registered in that area, but it's possible that more distant relatives or friends lived there." Gangwon, 7 months ago. The same province, the same period as the fire I had researched. The coincidence was too strong to ignore. "Mr. Park, I need more details about this fire. Names of victims, displaced persons, anything that might give me a clue about who Ms. Lee might have been helping." "Mr. Kim, this is a bit outside the scope of a standard background check, and it could be invasive." He began to protest. "Mr. Park," I interrupted him, my voice firm. "I understand, but this is not a standard check. It's a matter of safety for my family. Please, do whatever is necessary." The silence on the other end of the line indicated that he understood the seriousness of my request. "I'll do my best, Mr. Kim, but it may take some time." I hung up, my heart pounding, the house in the photo, the fire in Gangwon, the mark on her wrist. Everything was connecting, painting a picture of a personal tragedy. But what was the relationship between Ji-un's tragedy and the safety of my daughters? Was it the pain that made her dangerous? Or was there something more sinister behind her perfection? I looked at the girls, who were playing happily in the living room, oblivious to the web of secrets I was unraveling. They trusted Ji-un, they loved her. And me? I was torn between gratitude for the joy she had brought back into my home and the paralyzing fear that it was all an illusion. I needed the truth, not just to understand Ji-un, but to protect Seo-yeon and Ha-un from any shadow her past might cast upon them. The hunt had become a race against time, and I felt I was approaching the heart of the mystery. I was about to discover what Lee Ji-un truly hid. "Mr. Park, I need more details about this fire. Names of victims, displaced persons, anything that might give me a clue about who Ms. Lee might have been helping." The wait for Mr. Park's return was excruciating. Every minute felt like an hour, every hour an eternity. I revisited the images of the fire, those that the news had shown, and those I had found online myself. I zoomed in on photos of destroyed houses, of rubble, looking for something that might match the house in Ji-yoon's photo. That sloping roof, the small porch, the simple garden. I etched every detail into my mind, and then, in a local newspaper report, a clearer image of a devastated village. A close-up of a charred house, but with the structure still recognizable. The sloping roof, the small porch, what appeared to be the remains of a garden. It was it, the house from Ji-eun's photo, the house where she smiled with her family. My body went cold. Intuition turned into certainty. The phone rang, pulling me from my trance. It was Mr. Park. His voice sounded grave on the other end of the line. "Mr. Kim, I got the details you asked for. The village hit was Yeonhwa-ri in Gangwon province. The fire was devastating. Among the displaced and the victims, there are some names that may be relevant. A woman named Lee Hye-jin and a young man, Lee Jun-ho. They were initially listed as missing, then confirmed as fatalities of the fire. Their address was the same as the house Ms. Lee indicated as her childhood residence in her records. Lee Hye-jin, Lee Jun-ho, the surname. The face of the older woman in the photo, the young man's smile. My throat went dry. Ji-eun's mother, her brother. Ji-eun's perfection was not an armor, it was a tomb for her pain. She didn't have a sick family member. She had lost her family, her home, her life, in that fire. The mark on her wrist was a physical scar of a much deeper wound. But why was she here? Why did she infiltrate my life, my daughters' lives, with such a carefully constructed identity? The truth was darker than I could ever have imagined, and I was about to unearth it, whatever the cost. What Lee Ji-eun truly hid was not just a traumatic past, but a motive, a reason to be here now, caring for my daughters. And that reason, I feared, could be the most dangerous of all. The phone slipped from my hand, falling with a dull thud onto the desk. Mr. Park's words echoed in my head, each syllable a hammer striking the wall of my ignorance. Lee Hye-jin, Lee Jun-ho, missing, fatalities, the childhood home address, the house in the photo, the charred house in the report. My breath hitched. It wasn't just a sick family member, it was her family, her mother, her brother, dead, consumed by the flames that had also marked her wrist. Lee Ji-eun's perfection, the warm smile, the dedication to my daughters, everything disintegrated in an instant, revealing an abyssal pain, a trauma I could barely conceive. She wasn't a perfect nanny. She was a survivor, a walking wound who had infiltrated my home. The mark on her wrist wasn't just a physical scar. It was a silent epitaph for everything she had lost. But why? Why here? Why my daughters? The gratitude I felt for her turned into a chilling fear. Compassion for her tragedy fought against the urgency to protect Seo-yeon and Ha-eun, a woman who lost everything, who lived through hell, who hid this truth with such mastery. What would she be capable of? What did she want? I stood up, my knees weak, and went to the window. Down below, in the garden, Ji-eun laughed with the girls, pushing them on the swing I had set up. The scene, once so idyllic, now seemed like a macabre painting. Her laughter, their laughter, everything seemed a distant echo of a normalcy that perhaps had never existed. She loved them, I could see. But was that love genuine? Or was it part of a darker plan, a cold and calculated revenge? I needed answers, and I needed them now. The investigation into Ji-eun had reached a turning point. I knew who she was, what she had lost. Now I needed to know why she was here. And for that, I would have to look into my own past. The tragedy in Yeonhwa-ri could not be a coincidence. There was a connection. I felt it. A connection that I somehow had ignored or forgotten. I spent the night awake, immersed in old documents, project reports, newspaper articles from years ago. My company, Kim Holdings, was large and diversified with investments in various provinces. Could there be a link to Gangwon? To the village of Yeonhwa-ri? I revisited every project, every acquisition, every decision that could have had some impact on the rural region. Meanwhile, I observed Ji-eun. Every move she made, every word was now filtered through the lens of my new and terrible understanding. When she helped Seo-yeon tie her shoelaces, I saw the mother she had lost. When she read a story to Ha-yoon, I saw the brother she could no longer hug, and in her eyes, behind the smile, I began to perceive the deep melancholy, the shadow of a pain that never left her. She wasn't a villain, not in my eyes. She was a victim, but a victim with a purpose, and that purpose terrified me. My search led me to a real estate development project that Kim Holdings had considered in Gangwon Province about 8 years ago. It was an ambitious project to build a luxury tourist complex. I vaguely remembered it. The idea was discarded due to environmental issues and resistance from some local communities. But there was something else, a feasibility report. I opened the digital file, my fingers trembling. The report detailed the proposed area for development, and there it was, a section on land acquisition and resident relocation. Yeonhwa-ri was mentioned as one of the villages that would be affected, though not directly at the complex site, but in an adjacent area that would be expropriated for infrastructure. The project was cancelled, but preliminary negotiations had begun, and then a paragraph that made me hold my breath. During the initial evaluation phases, some rural properties with potential for acquisition at competitive prices were identified, including the Lee family property located on the eastern edge of Yeonhwa-ri, adjacent to the proposed expansion area. The family, consisting of Lee Hye-jin and her 2 children, Lee Jun-ho and Lee Ji-eun, initially showed resistance to the sale, but negotiations were underway before the project's cancellation. My eyes fixed on the name. Lee Ji-eun, her. My company had tried to buy her house, the house that burned down, the house where her family died. The project was cancelled, but the seed of discord, of intrusion, had already been planted. The connection. She wasn't just a nanny. She wasn't here by chance. My company, my family somehow, was linked to her tragedy. What Lee Ji-eun truly hid was not just a traumatic past, but a motive, a reason to be here, now, caring for my daughters. And that reason, I feared, could be the most dangerous of all, revenge. I looked at the photo of my daughters on my phone, my heart pounding. I had unearthed the truth, and it was far more terrifying than I could have imagined. The name, Lee Ji-eun, her. It wasn't just a cruel coincidence. It was a direct connection, a link forged in fire and pain. My company, Kim Holdings, had tried to buy her house. The house that burned down, the house where her family died. The project was cancelled, but the seed of discord, of intrusion, had already been planted. The connection. She wasn't just a nanny. She wasn't here by chance. My company, my family somehow was linked to her tragedy. What Lee Ji-eun truly hid was not just a traumatic past, but a motive, a reason to be here now, caring for my daughters. And that reason, I feared, could be the most dangerous of all. Revenge. I looked at the photo of my daughters on my phone, my heart pounding. I had unearthed the truth, and it was far more terrifying than I could have imagined. The report slipped from my fingers, falling onto the desk with a muffled sound that echoed in the silence of the night. My mind reeled, trying to process the magnitude of the revelation. Guilt hit me like a cold wave. My company, my decisions, or the decisions made in my name, had touched Ji-eun's life in such a devastating way. We were the intruders, the ones who tried to uproot her family. And now she was in my house, within my walls, caring for what I held most precious. The air seemed thin, Every breath was an effort. The image of Ji-yoon smiling with my daughters, playing in the garden, reading stories, feeding them, all transformed into a distorted mirage. Her perfection was not a gift, it was a weapon, a disguise meticulously constructed to infiltrate, to get close. But for what? To hurt my daughters? To make me feel the same pain she felt? The idea was nauseating. I stood up, stumbling, and went to the window. The garden was dark, lit only by the moonlight. I could almost see her down there, the shadow of her presence hovering over the house. She was sleeping, probably, in her room a few meters from my daughters. The proximity was suffocating. I could no longer see her as the gentle, loving nanny. Now I saw a woman with a past of fire and loss, with a motive I could barely begin to understand, but which filled me with a primal dread. Revenge. The word echoed in my head, cold and relentless. But how did she plan to take revenge? What would she do? And most importantly, when? Every minute that passed was a minute my daughters were under the care of someone I now saw as a veiled threat. I needed to act. But how? Confronting her would be dangerous. She was intelligent, calculating. If she managed to hide such a monumental tragedy for so long, she wouldn't hesitate to use any advantage. Doubt began to gnaw at my mind. The fire in Yeonhwa-ri, was it really an accident? Or could Kim Holding's attempt to acquire land, even if cancelled, have triggered something more sinister? Could there be a deeper, darker connection between what my company did and what happened to Ji-yoon's family? The possibility that the fire was not a mere misfortune, but a deliberate act, perhaps even linked to land disputes, chilled my blood. If that were the case, Ji-yoon's revenge would gain an even more complex and justified layer, though no less terrifying. I couldn't sleep. Every noise in the house made me jump. I found myself walking through the corridors, checking on the girls' rooms, watching their sleeping faces, Seo-yeon with her teddy bear clutched tight, Ha-eun the dreamer with a dreamy smile on her lips. They were so vulnerable, so oblivious to the danger I felt hanging over us. I was the only one who knew, the only one who could protect them. I spent the rest of the night planning, my mind in a whirl. I needed more information. I needed to understand her plan. I couldn't just fire her. That could trigger an unpredictable reaction. I needed concrete proof, not just of her past, but of her current intentions. I needed to understand the extent of her pain and what she was willing to do to appease it. Morning arrived, grey and heavy. I went downstairs, exhausted, but with a new resolve. Ji-eun was already in the kitchen, preparing the girls' breakfast, the aroma of pancakes filling the air. She turned with her usual smile. "Good morning, Mr. Kim. The girls are already awake and excited for breakfast." Her smile. Before, it was a comfort. Now it was a mask. My eyes, once filled with gratitude, now watched her with a mix of fear and cold determination. I needed to find out the truth, not just about her past, but about the future she planned for us. The hunt was over, the prey was in my house, and now the real battle began. I was caught in a web I had helped weave, and my daughters were at its center. I had to uncover what Lee Ji-eun truly wanted before it was too late. The aroma of pancakes, once a sign of a welcoming home, now seemed like a disguise, a fragrant veil over a bitter truth. Ji-eun's smile, so familiar, so gentle, was now an impenetrable mask. "Good morning, Mr. Kim. The girls are already awake and excited for breakfast." Her voice was soft, without a trace of the storm I felt within me. I forced a smile, a Herculean effort to maintain the facade of normalcy. "Good morning, Ji-eun. It smells delicious." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, a little hoarse, but she didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps she noticed and chose to ignore it. Every move she made in the kitchen, every gesture as she served pancakes to Seo-yeon and Ha-jun, was now dissected by my panicked mind. When she wiped a little syrup from the corner of Seo-yeon's mouth with her thumb, a gesture of maternal affection, I saw the mother she had lost and wondered if she was projecting her lost love onto my daughters, or if it was a rehearsal, a warm-up for something far more sinister. The idea was nauseating. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed more. I needed irrefutable proof of her intentions, not just of her past. Firing her precipitously could be dangerous, a spark that would ignite the revenge I feared. I needed to understand the scope of her plan, the depth of her pain, and what she was willing to do to appease it. My first action was discreet. While the girls were at school and Ji-eun was doing household chores, I made a series of calls. Not to the police, not yet, to a trusted private detective, someone I had used in the past for delicate corporate matters. I needed him to investigate the Yeonhwa-ri fire with a new perspective. I wanted to know if there were any irregularities in the original investigation, if the accidental cause was really what it seemed to be. I also asked him to trace Lee Ji-eun's steps after the tragedy. Where did she go? Who took her in? How did she manage to get back on her feet? And more importantly, how did she end up in my house? The following days were torture. I lived in a state of constant alert, every nerve on edge. I watched Ji-eun like a hawk, but had to do so without raising suspicion. I invented excuses to work from home, to be present, to keep an eye on my daughters. When Ji-eun read to them, her melodious voice filling the room, I wondered if the bedtime stories were just that, or if there were hidden messages, seeds of ideas planted in their young minds. When she helped them with homework, I leaned in, pretending to read a document, but in reality, listening to every word, looking for any deviation, any hint. Seo Yeon, always perceptive, noticed my change. "Daddy, are you okay? You look tired." Ji-eun looked at me, and for an instant I saw something in her eyes. A flicker of curiosity, perhaps, or a silent understanding. I quickly looked away. "I'm fine, darling, just a lot of work." Paranoia was a slow poison. I started checking the door locks at night, inspecting the girls' toys, looking at the food Ji-eun prepared with growing distrust. It was irrational, I knew, but fear was stronger than reason. I felt guilty for every dark thought, for doubting the woman my daughters loved. But Ji-eun's face, the name Lee Ji-eun, and the image of the burning house were etched in my mind. The private detective, a man named Choi, called me 3 days later. His voice was grave. "Mr. Kim, I found some things about the Yeonhwa-ri fire. The original investigation was quite superficial, considering the loss of life. It was quickly filed as an accidental household electrical failure. But there's one detail that caught my attention. There was a report from a neighbor who claimed to have seen an unfamiliar car in the area on the night of the fire, but the police didn't pay much attention to it." My heart pounded. An unfamiliar car? What kind of car? He couldn't describe the model or license plate, just that it was dark and seemed to have been parked for some time before the fire. And more importantly, he mentioned that the Lee family had had some disagreements with people from outside the village about selling their land in the preceding months. Nothing that amounted to a direct threat, but there was considerable pressure. Pressure, my company, Kim Holdings, the seed of discord. Guilt crushed me again. The fire was not just an accident. There was a real possibility that it had been orchestrated, or that the pressure of land acquisition had led to a dangerous situation. If that were the case, Ji-eun's revenge would not only be understandable, but, in her pain-distorted mind, perhaps even justified, and that made her even more dangerous. "What about Ji-eun?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She went to an orphanage in Seoul, after spending some time with distant relatives who couldn't keep her. She was a model child, very intelligent. She got a scholarship to a good university, studied early childhood education. Then she worked in some daycare centers until about a year ago she started looking for private nanny positions. Her record is impeccable, Mr. Kim. She's exactly who she says she is, in terms of qualifications and experience. Impeccable. It was the word that terrified me most. A perfect facade, meticulously built over years of pain and planning. She wasn't just any nanny. She was a survivor, a strategist. And now she was in my house with my daughters, and the truth about the Yonhwa-ri fire was beginning to unfold, revealing a web of events far more complex and darker than I could have imagined. I was trapped, and with each new discovery, the knot tightened even further. I had to uncover what Lee Ji-yun truly wanted before it was too late. I had to uncover what Lee Ji-yun truly wanted before it was too late. Detective Choi's information, while not giving me irrefutable proof of her current intention, solidified my conviction that she was a woman with a plan, shaped by tragedy and driven by a thirst for justice, or perhaps revenge. Every word she spoke, every gesture was now filtered through this dark lens. My home, once my sanctuary, had become a prison of anxiety. The night dragged on, and I found myself watching the girls sleep, their innocent faces illuminated by the faint light from the hallway. Seo-yeon, my little artist, always with a pencil in her hand. Ha-eun, the dreamer, with her vivid imagination. They were my world, and the idea that someone could be manipulating their young minds was an indescribable torment. The next day, the routine seemed the same, but for me, it was a silent battlefield. Ji-eun prepared breakfast, helped the girls get dressed for school. I pretended to work on my laptop, but my eyes and ears were fixed on her. It was during the afternoon, when the girls returned from school, that the first piece of the puzzle clicked into place, in a way that chilled me to the bone. Seo-yeon, my eldest daughter, came running to me with a drawing in her hands, her eyes shining with pride. "Daddy, look what I drew! Ji-eun-uni helped me!" She handed me the paper. It was a vibrant drawing, but with a disturbing theme. There was a burning house, with small, sad figures outside, watching the flames. Beside it, a larger figure in a suit with a grim face seemed to be laughing. And in the corner, a lonely girl with tears in her eyes, but with an expression of determination. "What is this, darling?" I asked, my voice a little tenser than I intended. "It's the story Ji-eun-uni told us today," Seo-yeon explained, excited. "It's about a family who lost everything because of a bad man who wanted their land. And the girl, she promised that one day she would make the bad man understand her pain." My heart stopped. The bad man. The land. The burning house. It was an allegory, a childish version of her own tragedy, but with a clear and poisonous message. Ji-eun was planting seeds of distrust and resentment in my daughters' minds, using her own pain to distort their perception of the world, and perhaps of me. I looked at Ji-eun, who was sitting on the sofa, helping Ha-eun with a puzzle. She gave me a gentle smile, but her eyes, for a brief instant, shone with an intensity I had never seen before. It was the gleam of victory, of certainty. That night, the revelation deepened. I heard Ji-eun telling Ha-eun a bedtime story. It wasn't a common fairy tale. It was about a kingdom where the king, too busy with his riches and power, neglected his people and even his own family. And how a young orphan, who had lost everything because of the king's greed, promised that one day she would make the king feel the loneliness and emptiness she felt. "But the orphan didn't want to hurt the king, Ha-eun," Ji-eun whispered, her voice melodious and full of deceptive sweetness. "She just wanted him to understand, to feel the pain of having no one to love, of being alone at the top of his wealth. The loneliness, the emptiness, the pain of having no one to love. That was it. She didn't want to hurt my daughters physically. She wanted to steal what I valued most, their love and trust. She wanted to isolate me, to make me feel the same loneliness she felt after losing her family. She was using my daughters as instruments for her revenge, turning their love for me into a weapon against me. I couldn't wait any longer. Each day, each story, she was building an invisible barrier between my daughters and me, subtly poisoning their affection. The next morning, with the girls at school, I called her into the living room. The air was heavy, charged with a tension only I could feel. She entered with her usual smile, but I couldn't bear it anymore. "Ji-yoon," I began, my voice firm, but with an almost imperceptible tremor. "We need to talk." She sat down, crossing her hands in her lap, her posture impeccable. "Of course, Mr. Kim. Is there a problem?" I picked up Seo-yeon's drawing, which I had kept. I placed it on the coffee table, facing her. Her eyes fell on the image of the burning house, the grim man, and the lonely girl. Her smile wavered, just for a split second. "I know about Yeonhwa Ri Ji-eun," I said, my voice low, but laden with all my pain and contained anger. "I know about your family. I know about the fire, and I know about what you're doing to my daughters." Her face paled. The mask fell completely. Her eyes, once gentle, now burned with a mix of hurt, fury, and deep pain. You investigated my past?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper but with a sharp edge. "I had to," I replied, guilt gnawing at me, but the need to protect my daughters was greater. "I saw Seo-yeon's drawing. I heard your bedtime stories. You are using my daughters for your revenge. You are trying to make me feel the same pain you felt, taking their love for me." She stood up, her eyes fixed on mine, without a shred of remorse. "And you think you didn't deserve it, Mr. Kim? You, who built your empire on the ruins of innocent people's lives? Do you think the pain of an orphaned child has no price? Do you think I would forget what your company did to my family, to my home, to my future?" Her voice rose in a crescendo of emotion. "I didn't want to hurt your daughters. I just wanted them to understand, to see the truth behind their father's facade, to know the price of greed. I wanted you to feel what it's like to have your world turned upside down, to lose what you love most, and to see the hand that destroyed it smile and move on." Her words hit me like blows, each one charged with the force of years of suffering. I was cornered, caught in the web I had helped weave. Her revenge was not an act of physical violence, but a psychological torture, slow and insidious, targeting the heart of my existence. "You can't do this," I said, my voice choked. "They are innocent." "Innocent?" She laughed, a bitter, joyless laugh. "And wasn't I innocent when I lost everything? What you did to my family was no less destructive. You just didn't see the flames, Mr. Kim. I saw them, and I lived in them for years." The truth was a double-edged sword. I was the predator, and now she was the hunter. I had underestimated her pain, her intelligence, her determination. She wasn't just a nanny. She was a force of nature, shaped by tragedy. "I'm sorry, Ji-yoon," I said, and the sincerity in my voice surprised her. "I'm sorry for what happened to your family. I didn't know the extent of our actions' impact." "Knowing or not knowing doesn't change what happened," she replied, the anger subsiding a little, replaced by a deep sadness. "But now you know, and now you will feel." The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. I had discovered her plan, the depth of her pain, and the extent of her revenge. But what would I do now? How would I protect my daughters, not only from her, but from the truth she had planted in their minds? The nanny I brought home to care for my children had become the mirror of my own guilt, and the price of my ignorance would be paid with what I held most precious. The aroma of pancakes, once a symbol of a welcoming home, now hung like the smell of a fire, a constant reminder of what had been lost and what could still be destroyed.